So now please welcome Alexis Nikole Nelson.
Hi, everybody. Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This is my first OFA conference, digital or otherwise, so I'm very excited to be included. We are going to be talking about foraging, specifically foraging for things that you can find in urban and suburban spaces. Uh, One thing that Madison said right when I joined the Zoom was that you really do think that foraging has to occur deep in the forest. Deer have to be walking past you and you have to be communing with nature. And I gather cornelian cherries out of a tree in a park 2 blocks away from my house in the summertime. And cars will be going by wondering what I'm doing, and I do not feel like I'm in the wilderness at all, but it is still foraging and it is still fun. And with a little bit of insight and common sense, it is still safe. So I'm going to quickly intro me, talk about a couple safety things. Everyone loves safety. It's always the sexiest part of talking about doing anything in nature. And then we're going to dive into some of the plants that I specifically picked for just the Ohio region in general, including some fun ones that you will probably recognize towards the end. I may also go on a short rant about ramps because we're coming up on ramp season, but we'll save all of those goodies for the end of the presentation. So, who am I? Well, my name is Alexis, and by day, I am a marketing manager for a dog company. But also by day and occasionally by night, I gather food that doesn't belong to me, and I make content about it on the internet. I've been doing this since before I was making content about it on the internet, and I didn't think anyone was going to like it. But here we are, just a very casual 500,000 now people watching me eat onion grass out of my backyard. Life is very strange. Quarantine has really put something I thought was a secret hobby right into the limelight. So before we dive into kicking off your wonderful journey as an intrepid urban, suburban, or rural forager, let's talk about a couple things to keep in mind, like locations that you might want to avoid. The question that I typically get going into any kind of foraging talk or class is, hey, how do I know what I'm gathering is safe? The worst answer to that question is unless you're testing every single aspect of where you're gathering, if you're testing the soil, if you're testing the air, if you're testing the plant matter itself, there's no way to be like a zillion, like 100% sure. But that also goes for things that you're getting at the grocery store. But there are some places that I keep in mind to avoid, especially in city settings. For example, if a place looks like a dog could have peed there, a dog has peed there. That's just keep that rule in your noggin. If it is a dog pee reachable area at some point in the not so distant past, a dog has peed there, and you have to take into consideration whether or not that's a deal breaker for you. And it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's just rained or it is actively raining, and I'll be like, I'm fine with this, but 9 times out of 10, the little strip of area alongside sidewalks, probably best to keep it a no-go unless you somehow live in a neighborhood with no dogs, which is just sad for another reason. Another thing to think about, and this is one that folks are usually like, oh, I didn't even think to consider that, is tracks along old houses. The house that I live in right now is a very young, 115 years old. I guarantee you there is still lead paint somewhere on the outside of this house. And because of that, I give my own home about a 10-foot radius when it comes to gathering food. The exception being our front porch, which is pretty new. And we didn't know this when we moved in, there's just a huge thing of Japanese knotweed underneath that front porch. The porch is going to lose that battle one of these decades, but until we move out, I will be keeping it at bay with my knife and fork. Other very places you've likely considered to not gather alongside: large roadsides. Let's give a solid 60, 70-foot radius to multi-lane highways. If cars are traversing it very frequently, if large vehicles are traversing it frequently, just the pollution and the runoff capability, why risk it? Not supersede it gathering along like I-71 anyway. Have I pulled over a vehicle for elderflowers along I-71? Yes, but I will not advise you to do the same. Do as I say, not as I do. Also, same thing goes for railroad tracks, and especially for railroad tracks, because on active ways, they will spray herbicides alongside the tracks for about a solid 10 to 20 foot radius, just to keep their rails clear for safety reasons on their own end. So let's just avoid railroad tracks too. Golf courses, anything that's that big and that consistently green in general, just leave it alone. There's a lot of pesticides. There's probably a lot of herbicides. Just golf courses are a plight. And maybe next year my rant can be about how large swaths of grass are horrible monocultures and should be replaced with other things. No hate, no shade if you like golfing. Everyone in my family likes golfing too. I can't take that away from them. They won't let me. And lastly, industrial sites. If large heavy machinery is digging into that portion of Earth, leave it alone. Leave it alone. If you're really wanting to do a deep dive into your area, the EPA also puts out a yearly report of all of the reported leaks of various chemicals in your area. City of Columbus, we are not immune. There are 2 within a 5-mile radius of my house, both of which are downstream from where I live on the Alum Creek, which is nice. But just another thing that you might want to think about, most spills that are reported are not contaminants that would negatively affect a human, but some of them are. Just things to think about. Everyone loves safety. And I know at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, you just highlighted a lot of spaces in the city. Is anything actually safe to eat? Well, Wellesley College just did a study. They didn't just do it. They did it 4 years ago with a group of Boston foragers, following them along for an entire year of gathering, because one of them had tested for high lead levels in their blood, and they were worried it was the food they were gathering together and canning and eating, and actually found that by and large, apples, stone fruits had less arsenic and lead in them than apples and stone fruits that you were buying at your conventional big box grocery store. So maybe we just need to be a little cautious about all the food decisions that we're making and not just the wild ones. And that's okay. It's not saying not to eat any of them. It's just saying to make informed decisions. Also, by and large, wild food tends to have a slightly higher nutritional content. We haven't bred those things to taste better. Tasting better usually gets rid of a lot of the things that are good for you. So if you're feeling a little sluggish this spring, just go eat some garlic mustard. You'll feel fine. And also, it's really invasive. Please eat all of it. So, starting with the OG, the one everybody knows. Your mom probably told you that these are edible, and it is our sweet friend, the dandelion. Friend, unless you are trying to maintain a perfectly manicured lawn, then they are enemy number 1, the dandelion. But they shouldn't be. The entire plant from flower to root is edible, and edible in a lot of really fun ways. I do hear a lot of folks this time of year, especially talking about making coffee with the roasted roots. So if you know of a patch of dandelion, say in your yard or in a patch of woods close to you, digging up their roots right now, roasting them and grinding them makes for a really nice caffeine-free coffee replacement that, in my opinion, is like a better bitter than the bitter you get from regular coffee. Really fun discovery I made this past year is that if you can catch the flower buds while they are still against the rosette of leaves before they put up that stem, they caper extraordinarily well. So giving them a nice little brine, putting them through some pickling processing, excellent way to have plentiful capers that are probably growing around your house. Lots of folks also know about dandelion wine, very popular. A bunch of folks who I am friends with are trying their dandelion wine that they started fermenting back in the spring and early summer right now that it's aged. Folks will make like a thickened syrup with the flowers infused into it to use in place of honey. It can be used in so many different ways. You can also just throw the leaves into a salad. I am a huge baby about bitter salad greens, so I will not be tossing dandelion leaves directly into my salad, but you do you. It's your life. They're great for you, so I probably should be throwing them into my salads, if we're being perfectly honest. Next is cattails. I hear them lovingly referred to as the grocery store of the swamp. Which I just think is a stellar name for the type of species. And once again, the whole thing is edible at certain stages. I don't know how internet plugged in everyone here is. There was a very large debate raging on the TikToks just a few short months ago about the edibility of what we call the forbidden corn dog portion. You know, the thing that everybody recognizes about the cattail. And what I will tell you is it is edible, but not at the time when it looks fun, which I know isn't the answer that anybody ever wants. By the time it looks like a cooked corn dog, it is full of compressed seedlings and not something that you want to be taking a hefty bite out of. Your mouth will explode seeds and whoever's with you will laugh at you. So take that into consideration. But when those seed heads are still immature, still green, which you'll find in the summertime, they're a fantastic edible. Cattail has a very corn, like a very sweet corn-esque taste to me. It really kind of depends on the waterways and the species though. Some err more on the side of cucumber, but they tend to fall within like a cucumber to corn spectrum. Which is a spectrum you will never have to use again. I really think cattails are the only ones that fall on that axis. So if we just start at the bottom and I guess work our way up in terms of uses, right now it is cattail rhizome season. Well, it will be when the temperature gets a little bit consistently above freezing again, because that is when you can go into the muck on the side of ponds, slow-moving creeks and rivers, and dig up those rhizomes, because they have rhizomes, not roots, and they can be either eaten as a root vegetable or dried and processed in order to use as starch, like you would use a cornstarch, like you would use an acorn starch. Great for thickening up soups, stews. I really want to try making a jelly out of it because you can make acorn jelly with the starch, but I don't think I will be able to convince anybody else to eat cattail jelly. We'll see. The pollen that you can get from, well, the seed heads, before they are the seed heads, female ones will have a little like shoot of pollen, like a little pollen spear at the top of them. That pollen is extraordinarily protein rich. It is very fine and is an excellent additive to baked goods alongside your flour. Now, of course, there is no gluten present, so unless you want what you're baking to be crumbly on purpose, which is totally fine, I would not replace all of the flour with cattail pollen, but I'd replace like up to 1/4 of the flour with cattail pollen. I've had that go successfully for me. And then, like I said before, the seed heads can be eaten while they are still green. If you're really sad about them not being brown, give them a bread and a fry, and I am sure you will not notice the difference. Except your mouth won't be full of seeds. Purslane. This year, for whatever reason, I've gotten more questions about using purslane than anything else because a lot of folks see it, especially they'll creep up in potted plants. They love to sneak into raised beds, gardens in general, and they are also they're very tough. They're very persistent. You'll see them coming up in the cracks of sidewalks in the middle of large cities in the heat of summer. And everything above ground on it is edible. The roots aren't bad for you, they're just not good. So no worries about like, oh, I got a little bit of the root up when I pulled it up. Am I, putting myself in danger? No. Purslane is a wonderful native succulent. It also has the highest amount of omega-3 fatty acids of any of the plant kingdom, which is cool and fun. I'm a dumb vegan, so I have to think about things like that when I'm making my food choices during the course of the year. It is amazing fresh. Give it a little rinse when you bring it in, put that onto a salad instead of lettuce, and you will never go back to having boring lettuce on your like sandwiches, salads ever again. I also love giving it a quick pickle, tossing it in a little bit of salt, a little bit of like crushed red pepper or black pepper, if that's what you get down with, letting that salt do its cool osmosis process and start to leach out a little bit of that moisture. And the plant will then take in a little bit of the salt while still maintaining a great crunch. It's a really great snack food in the middle of summertime. I also made kimchi with it for the first time this past year after a friend of mine who is a forager of Korean descent in Indianapolis was like, oh, you have to try making kimchi with purslane. You'll never think of it the same way again. And it was fantastic. It just holds up to the fermentation process much better than some leafy greens do, in my opinion. Not in my opinion, it's like a scientific fact. It's a bit more substantive than a lot of the greens that we like to pickle or ferment. So go out and find some purslane. It's also one of those plants that once you lock eyes with it and recognize it once, you will start seeing it everywhere, which is great. Maybe avoid the stuff in the cracks in the sidewalk though. Like I took a picture of this purslane. I didn't eat that purslane. It's fine. Next, we have wood sorrel, talking about another plant that loves showing up on the edges of people's yards, on the edges of people's gardens. Wood sorrel is usually the name used to encompass the entire oxalis species. The one pictured is most common to our area, but you'll also find oxalises with purple leaves, with more yellowy leaves, but they always have the telltale 3 and the the cute little heart-shaped leaves because of the 2 lobes on each of them. They are often confused with clovers. I will never fault anyone for calling this a clover because I think at some point in our childhood, we were all told they were clovers, even though they are not. Clovers are also delicious, a bit more protein-laden than wood sorrel is, though. It, because of the oxalic acid in it, is very acidic and very lemony. Growing up, I would have like my grandparents make, they called it Appalachian lemonade, pouring hot water over the wood sorrel leaves, letting it seep and infuse, sweetening it, and then putting it in the fridge, and then drinking that during the summer. And it's really refreshing. It's actually super good. And because it is like very lemony and doesn't skew either savory or sweet in its own taste, it can really be applied wherever you would be applying like a squeeze of lemon into any kind of dish. So maybe that's tucking a couple sprigs of wood sorrel into the foil when you are putting some fish into the oven to bake. I haven't done that in 10 years, but I used to for my family when I still ate fish. A thing to keep in mind, and I wanted to talk about wood sorrel for this very reason, is a lot of times when I bring it up, especially in like food academic spaces, folks will be like, well, I heard that wood sorrel and the oxalic acid in it can lead to kidney stones, and do you want to talk about that? Well, wood sorrel is not the only plant that you should be avoiding if you have a family history of kidney stones. I will say, if you have a family history of kidney stones, maybe leave the wood sorrel alone. Just buy a lemon. Just go to the grocery store and buy a lemon. But that also means that you have to be avoiding things like spinach, which I don't necessarily see people immediately jumping in and raising their hands to warn people of the dangers of. There's a lot of stigma around wild food, and a lot of it I think is necessary. You want to make sure you can identify what you're gathering. You want to make sure that it is coming from a source that is safe. But I do find it comes under a great deal more scrutiny in the realm of like its nutritional makeup than I feel like it should. Ooh, Madison, I see your question, and we have a slide for that. we have a slide for that, and I'm very excited to get to it. I'm sorry that you have to wait a little bit before we get there. I'm going to check time because I talk a lot. Okay, we're fine. We're doing good. We're trucking right on through. So this beautiful friend, looking at it makes me so sad that it's February and not like June or July. This is common milkweed, Asclepias syrica. A lot of my friends who are farmers are not as big of fans of it as I am because it does have the tendency to kind of show up on the edges of property. And once it gets established, it really doesn't want to get unestablished. It produces a lot of seeds in the fall and also spreads clonally by means of rhizomes and shoots. The edible parts of milkweed are the shoots when they start coming up in the spring, but you're going to want to find them when they're still, I'd say, 2.5 inches or shorter. The flowers, like the unopened flower buds, you can see some right here in the bottom picture, that cute little globe of buds that hasn't quite opened yet, along with the open flowers and the immature seed pods before the silks have set. Before the silks have set, don't make the mistake that I have where you have like gone through the entire process of cooking, deep frying, and biting into a milkweed pod and being like, nope, that's a set silk. There's hair in my mouth now, and everything is terrifying. So with milkweed, you are always going to want to give it a quick blanch before you go on and prepare it in whatever way you're going to prepare it. So that is just going to be taking, say, your shoots or your unopened seed pods, your young seed pods, unopened flower buds. Words are fun. And you're going to drop them into boiling water for 60 seconds and then immediately take them out and put them into cooling water to stop the cooking process. They are a very latex-laden plant. Latex is not a fun thing to eat. It causes a very weird, like, warming as if you've eaten something spicy, even though you haven't, effect in your mouth. Coming from a person who accidentally ate a lot of Osage orange latex this past fall in the pursuit of science. Once again, do as I say, not as I do. And so you're going to want to give it that quick blanch just to rid it of the little bit of latex that it's holding on to. Consistency-wise, it's just not fun. I will say the latex from Asclepias syrica is not offensive taste-wise. It is a lot sweeter than, say, the milky sap that you would get from, say, a butterfly weed or a showy milkweed, and you shouldn't eat those two. The bitterness of the latex is a little warning that those aren't the Asclepias species that you should be eating. Thankfully, common milkweed is very easy to tell apart from a lot of its genus counterparts. They do have the full globe of flowers, whereas on a butterfly weed, it's kind of a flat plane of orange and yellow flowers. Showy milkweed, once again, it doesn't really do the full globe that common does, and the flowers have the cute little scraggly bits coming off of the edges like little shooting stars. If you don't know what it looks like, I just explained it very poorly, and you should go and see it for yourself with a Google after this is over. But they're wonderful. I didn't grow up a broccoli fan. I very much had to grow into being a broccoli fan in adulthood. And for me, milkweed tastes the way I think broccoli should, with how many people love it so much. It's green, it's very inoffensive. It takes on other flavors extraordinarily well. And the flowers, if you've smelled common milkweed before, the flowers taste like they smell, which is very floral, very sweet, with the littlest bit of like fruity undertones, like the littlest bit of, say, like a sweet melon undertone underneath it. I make cordials and syrups with the flowers every year, and then I hoard them until February so I can make a cocktail with them on a hard Friday and close my eyes and pretend for a second that I'm standing in the middle of a field in July. But that's just me. You can also drink them at normal and less sad times. They also make for a wonderful infused sugar. So going and like blending those flowers in with some sugar, letting the flavors and a little bit of the moisture from the flowers seep into the sugar, and then going and sifting the flowers back out. And that keeps It's shelf stable. I mean, I have never had it for longer than a year to know if it's shelf stable for more than a year. So use it under a year is going to be what I will say to that. Once again, don't eat the seed pods. If the silks have formed, my rule of thumb is if the seed pods are bigger than my thumb, you're usually past the point. It's fine. You can come back to it in an additional month, throw some seeds around so you have more milkweed the following year. I also like talking about milkweed because it is a very important host plant for monarch butterflies. And that is something to keep in mind when you are deciding what you are going to gather and how much. So I have a stand of milkweed pretty close to my house that is humongous. Like the folks who live on the edges of where the plot is are worried because of how quickly it is clonally kind of spreading itself out. When you're at a humongous patch like that, I would not feel bad about gathering a couple shoots in the springtime because you know that there are still going to be hundreds upon hundreds of plants that are going to make it fully through their life cycle to produce seeds in the fall and make more. But if you're, say, only finding a stand of like 10 or 20, collect a single globe of flowers from, every 10 or 20 plants that you're seeing in the summertime, letting the other 2 to 4 globes of flowers that they produce go to seed. We just have to be very mindful because the monarch population has been suffering pretty hardcore for the last 15 years. And a lot of that is because the native space that common milkweeds used to occupy en masse have been getting paved over or turned into farms. So something to keep in mind. You can also plant your own common milkweed and then the butterflies will love you forever. And I can't think of something more dope than being a butterfly's best friend. Mulberries. This is a really great kind of mid to late spring forageable. Another one that I know a lot of us are familiar with. I grew up with a mulberry tree in my backyard in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was my joy and my mother's plight because I would absolutely stain at least 3 things with mulberries every year without fail. The berries are edible, and what I think a lot of people don't know is that the young leaves are also edible and make an excellent salad green and green tea dupe. The berries are pretty versatile, but I will say taste them before you commit to, say, making an entire thing of jam with them or making a pie with them, because I will have mulberries that are almost sickeningly sweet when ripe, and I will have mulberries that at their complete ripeness are still extraordinarily tart that I would maybe want to cut with another fruit, say June berries, which are fruiting concurrently with mulberries to make for a more balanced jam. The young leaves are great after a quick blanch. They do have like the littlest bit of latexiness too, but not something that I would deem unsafe for anybody after a blanch, not even someone with a latex allergy. What I like doing though is gathering the young leaves in, say, May, and I process them like you would process green leaves, which is steaming them, smushing them with your hands, drying them in a warm pan, and then I will typically grind them up after that and then use them as matcha. The taste is pretty spot on for any kind of generic green tea you would buy at the store, but sometimes you want green tea, but you don't want to be up for the next 5 hours. No, just me, that's okay. But it also does make for a really good baking matcha. So if you're, say, making like matcha mochi or matcha cookies, this is a very plentiful and very free source of that flavoring if you're into cool bakes. Okay, and now we're going to talk about my favorite, sweet baby, the state native fruit of Ohio, Asimina triloba, the pawpaw. So the edible part of the pawpaw, of course, if you are familiar with it, you know, is the soft pulp inside of the fruits. It ranges anywhere from like a very creamy white color to a like deep, almost orangey yellow. It all depends on the tree. There's a whole lot of varying in terms of texture, color, and taste. We have now moved into a world in which there are named cultivars. But pawpaws, like many fruits, do not breed true. So the only way to get those cultivars is to like purchase cuttings of them. So that's cool and fun. I like using them in place of wherever one would use bananas, mostly because I'm allergic to bananas, but also because I swear pawpaws taste better than bananas do. I actually cannot say that for certain. So if anybody does know, please feel free to call me out. Please feel free to correct me. I will say, just like the colors and the texture of the fruits vary from tree to tree, the taste of the fruits vary a whole lot too. You will find some that are almost like overripe mango sweet. You'll also occasionally find some that are like a little sweet at the beginning and then a little skunky at the end. So it's a fun adventure trying the fruits from different trees. And if you harvest pawpaws season over season, you'll start finding trees that you like more than others. And then you can just only start harvesting from them. Columbus people, there is a very popular park within the city limits that will remain nameless that has 3 of the best pawpaw trees I have ever harvested from. And when I say in the city, I don't mean like High Banks Metro Park, like way out of it, like in the city, We can talk about it later if you want to. As long as you promise not to take them all, we can share. They're delightful. They are a relic of times when megafauna were all over this part of the United States, which is before people were all over this part of the United States. That is why their seeds are so big. They were built for giant sloths to eat and not for people. But they're really fun. They look really out of place when you start noticing them along slow-moving bodies of water. Honestly, I'm hard-pressed to find a creek or a river in Ohio that doesn't have pawpaw stands along at least part of it. And they just have these big old giant glossy leaves and these tropical looking fruit. I just feel like they got lost. Everyone else in their plant family is from warmer places. And then this guy's just chilling in the Midwest. I love that for them. Okay, and then we're gonna just take a hot second to talk about ramps. We're gonna take a hot second to talk about ramps because I feel like whenever you talk about foraging in the Midwest, this is the first thing that a lot of people bring up. A lot of folks have harvested ramps before, and if they haven't, a lot of folks have bought ramps from, say, their farmer's market. Sometimes even Whole Foods has ramps during the springtime. And what I will say to you is this: ramps are not on the watch list in Ohio yet. Ramps are on the watch list in 3 other states already. And all of them are states that serve kind of a very fancy foodways. Like it's New Jersey, they're on the watch list because those ramps are serving people in the city of New York City. Same thing with the state of New York. And now one of the 2 variants of Allium trichoculum is on the watch list in the state of Tennessee as well. Hey, Alexis, why are they on the watch list? That is an excellent question, person who wasn't me. It is because out of all of the members of the Allium genus, ramps take the longest to reach sexual maturity, which is unfortunate because they are also celebrated as probably one of the tastiest members of the Allium family. On average, it takes ramps 5 years to reach maturity to the point where they can put out a flower and produce seeds. Some do it in as few as 2 or 3. Some take as long as 7 or 8. And it's very hard to know where a ramp is along its life cycle during the season in which they are most often gathered, which is early spring. We're going to be knocking on ramp season's door before we know it. If you have to get your ramp fix, which I understand, I do too. This is not a ramp-free household. I will say this: don't dig up the bulbs. I know. People love pickled ramp bulbs, and I have had people get into fights with me on the internet about telling them to not dig up ramp bulbs. If you want to plant ramps on your own property, if you have any sloping, north-facing, well-drained, partial shade, near water property that is under your own name, please, by all means, go and buy some ramp seeds on Etsy and plant some on your own property. That's fantastic, because then you're not cutting into the native population if you go and need those ramp bulbs. I will also say, in my opinion, from a culinary standpoint, there's way more flavor in the leaves of ramps than in the bulbs. Anyway, during ramp season, if I am at a large grouping of them, because they will just kind of make these little mats of themselves just in the nature of the way that they spread their seeds, I will take one leaf from a ramp plant with 2 or more leaves every 10 ramp plants that fit that criteria I see. And I know that doesn't leave you with a lot of ramps, but what I do is I will salt and dry them and then grind them, and then it's like onion powder, except 5 zillion times better. We just ran out of last year's, and I'm very sad about it. But it's already almost ramp season, so the opportunity to make more will be here before we know it. Please, nobody yell at me. I'm just like the Lorax for weird native species. I just want them to be safe. Book recommendations. Woo! Air horn noise. Wow. So these are the 3 books that, as an Ohioan, I find extraordinarily helpful, and each for a different reason. Midwest Foraging, of course, is very location specific. All of the plants listed in that book are plants that you will find in the state of Ohio. That being said, there's a little bit of varying between, the southwest and southeast of the state, the center of the state, and then the northern, more like lake adjacent part of the state. But that's half of the fun of foraging, isn't it? It's like a fun little scavenger hunt. And I like telling folks to start with a location specific reference book. Honestly, because psychology-wise, it's a bit more rewarding to see things that are actually around you instead of, say, leafing through a Peterson's guide and being like, I don't know if any of this is near me. I'm really excited about this. Oh, it's in every other region of the United States except mine? Well, that stinks. So Midwest Foraging is wonderful. Lisa M. Rose is a very knowledgeable forager. Her writing is super accessible. The photos are nice and big and glossy. I wish that they had more photos of plants during different points in their life cycle, but that is where The Forager's Harvest by fellow Midwesterner Samuel Thayer comes into play. That is a much heftier book than Midwest Foraging. It also does cover plants from a series of different regions, but him being a Midwest king himself, he does focus in a lot on the abundance in our area. You can even see that like ramps are on the cover of the book. He is great at advice about safely foraging. He has a ton of great recommendations for how he prepares all of the wild edibles that he gathers each year. He has a ton of photos detailing plants through their entire life cycle, so you can recognize things, say, before they are at the point where you'd want to be gathering from them. And he puts a cute little chart in that tells you what time of year everything is like available for harvesting. So that takes a little bit of the guesswork out of what you're going out to find. If you're, say, heading down to Wayne National Forest in like June and want to know what's in season, the answer is greenbriers, and once again, eat all of them. They're not an invasive species, but in my mind, they win the award for native species that acts the most like an invasive species when given the opportunity. And lastly, Forage Harvest Feast, which is, oh man, I even have it right next to me. I love it so much. A bit more of an unconventional choice. It's written by an urban forager out of Brooklyn named Marie Viljoen. And what she does is, instead of going through a lot of different plants, she highlights like 45 of them. And when you go and flip to any of the sections, like let's talk about bayberry for a second. That's fun. We have bayberry in Ohio, which, spending a lot of time in New England as a kid, I didn't know we also had bayberry here. I thought it was just a Northeast thing. She'll go through all of the common names. She'll go through a little bit of the ethnobotany. She'll tell you all of the parts that are useful and how, give you a bit of the history behind the usage of this plant in the United States. giving a lot of like good nods to indigenous culture, which is where we get a lot of this information from, and then leads you through all of these amazing, beautiful gourmet level recipes so you can just like impress the people that you live with. And then later, when the world is safe, impress people that you don't live with. It's a really imaginative take on using foraged grains. I think a lot of people think of foraging and they're like, oh, a salad, you know, and that is what it is a lot of the time. But she just has this beautiful culinary imagination and reconfigures things into beverages and sauces and desserts and hearty dinners. And I just think it's a useful thing to have on any forager's shelf, because it also just encourages you to be a bit more imaginative with the way that you're preparing what you're gathering. Yeah, and I think that's it. I don't know what happens if I click again. Nothing. That answers that question. Awesome, awesome. I'm gonna move the chat to where I can see it. Oh my God, I missed so many great comments. Common milkweed latte, yes. Oh my gosh, it would be like a rose latte, but a million times better. Oh, okay, Kelly, when are pawpaws ripe? I have found a ripe pawpaw in Ohio as early as the last week of August, and I have found them as late as the last week of October. Now, the bulk of them are going to be ripe during the month of September. Like, that is a great time to be going out and gathering, but I would start going out at the end of August and scout out locations. And this is gonna sound really dumb until you do it yourself. Follow your nose. Ripe pawpaws, you can smell them from a mile away because you'll be walking through a lot of like green summer smells, and then suddenly it'll smell like a mango. And that's very out of place anywhere else in the state of Ohio. They're very easy to find by scent. Also, because when they fall, they will start fermenting very quickly because of their very high sugar content. And those guys are really easy to smell too. Ooh, ramp seeds from Rural Action. I don't know if I'm allowed to have people say more things about the words that they said, because I want to know more things. Oh, I do. Oh, United Plant Savers is wonderful. I'm speaking to my people here. This makes me really happy. Spice bush. Lucky to have a lot of spice bush growing on in nearby our farm property. You are lucky. I have 2 baby spice bushes, and they are my pride and joy, along with my baby pawpaw tree. We harvest and dry the berries. Share any advice on the best ways to use spice bush for tea? Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing for spice bush is, and you were already kind of leading into this question, is the leaves aren't the only part that can be used for tea. This time of year, actually, because spice bush is often the one who kind of kicks off spring in our region, liquid is already flowing inside of their xylem and phloem. Their flower buds are already getting a lot bigger. I don't know if you've gone out and like taken a close little gander at their twigs recently. I have to, because it's what reminds me that spring will get here eventually. And spice bush twigs both make for a wonderful tea, and kind of in the way that you can put like vanilla pods into a little bit of vodka and let them steep for months in order to make a vanilla extract. You could also do the same thing with the twigs of your spice bush and make a spice bush extract that you could use for baking as well. It's really fun and funky, and adds a little bit of all spicy, peppery depth into whatever baked good you're adding it to. So yeah, the bark and the whole twigs are fantastic for making tea. Ooh, when is mushroom season in Columbus? So we're pretty lucky, well, as lucky as anybody in like on, you know, this latitude is. I would say that mushroom season opens with morels, which you can start finding in April. And if we want to be really technical about it, mushroom season doesn't really close until February. I was just finding enoki a week ago that are still persisting through the snow. And a lot of winter oysters will usually keep doing their thing until January. I think the dead cottonwood that I had been harvesting oyster mushrooms from only just stopped fruiting about 2 weeks ago. So if you are willing to be very intrepid and brush a lot of snow off of a lot of fallen logs, mushroom season is pretty much April through now. Now we are entering the period of time where I'm like, okay, it's time to just live off of the stuff that I found this past year and start prepping for everything that's gonna start coming up in a month. Oh gosh, plants that are high in calcium, please eat garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is the answer. Garlic mustard is high in a lot of different vitamins and minerals, which almost makes me forgive it for how horribly invasive it is. Almost. It just spreads so voraciously. Later in the season, high in calcium. Oh gosh. Oh, that's a toughie. Tom, I might have to think about that one and get back to you, if that is okay. Maple season is in a couple of weeks. I just ate a sap icicle off of a maple tree in my neighborhood last week because we had that nice little thaw. And I think some of the sugar maples and black maples in our neighborhood got a bit excited, not knowing that this week was just going to be very bleak in terms of temperature. Yeah, I can't wait for maple season. I really want to try tapping a birch this year. Birch sap is also great. Lower sugar content, so it takes more to make the same amount of syrup, but we have a decent amount of birches in Ohio too. There are a lot of tappable trees, sycamores. Oh yeah, Diana, sycamore sap is fantastic. I did not believe that it was like as butterscotchy as people said that it is once it's cooked down. And of course, yes, black walnut trees, which many of us recognize from being annoyed at walking over the fallen walnuts in the fall. Pro tip, if you catch those walnuts in the summertime while they are still immature and their inner shell hasn't fully formed, you can use it to make nocino, which is a black walnut liqueur. It doesn't always have to be made with black walnuts. It originated in Italy, and they definitely don't have black walnuts. That's our native walnut. But you can make nocino with ours too, and it's delightful. And much like vanilla extract and spice bush extract, I can speak, is fantastic in baked goods. I don't really use vanilla extract anymore. I've pretty much completely replaced it with just adding nocino in instead. What are your favorite out of place or invasive plants to forage? I have already said, I don't think I'm allowed to say garlic mustard anymore. But if I'm thinking about other out of place or invasive plants that I love foraging, even though they're not really posing that big of a threat, you guys know mimosa trees, the ones that look like truffula trees from Dr. Seuss that make the pink silky flowers that smell really good and are real fun to brush against your face. Yeah, those flowers are edible. And I had a great time this past summer experimenting with those. I made a ton of syrups. I made like a fermented cordial, like the wild yeast on the flowers was prevalent enough that it started a fermentation process and it got all nice and fizzy. And I have to remember to open it every couple of weeks so it doesn't explode in my refrigerator. And in terms of tools that I would suggest to committed foragers on a budget, having been a committed forager on a budget, get a dehydrator. I know, they're not cheap. Just do it. This is one of the like $70 ones, and I saved up for a bit to get it. It just, not feeling like you have to go through everything that you bring home the second that you bring it home is just such a weight off of my shoulders, at least. And also it lets me make mushroom jerky, which I'm a really big fan of. And I burn things in my oven. My oven's temperature is very inconsistent. So when people are like, oh, just put it in your oven at the lowest temperature and like open it every 10 minutes. No, that is how I burned a ramp leaf, and that's never allowed to happen again. So I would say a dehydrator, and finding a place that sells ball canning equipment as inexpensively as you can manage to find. My partner has a family who spends time up in Maine, and there's a store very close to their house in the small town that they live in that sells ball canning equipment for like half the price that I typically find it at, say, Walmart or Kroger or Target here in Ohio. And so for me, that's like my secret pro tip. But there are definitely places in Ohio where you can find good canning jars, mason jars, for less than Target will try and get you to pay for them. And those are great too, just for putting your dried goods into, putting liquidy things into, makes storage a whole lot easier. Ooh, I love an autumn olive. That is another really good invasive species to highlight. We are no longer in autumn olive season, but their berries do often persist through the month of November and sometimes into December if it's mild enough. That is Eleganus umbellata, if I remember correctly, the scientific name for autumn olives. They are these cute, tart little berries. If you catch them before first frost, they can sometimes be like mouth puckeringly tart. They kind of do that thing to your mouth that unripe persimmons can do to your mouth too, where you're like, oh, it's a desert in there now. I don't know how this happened. But waiting until after getting them hit by first frost or gathering a ton and putting them in your own freezer and then removing them is a great way to fake that process too. They are, okay, so I use autumn olives in a lot of different ways. This past year for Thanksgiving, I made a combo cranberry autumn olive jelly instead of just like a regular cranberry jelly. And I liked it a lot better than regular old cranberry sauce. My partner doesn't like cranberry sauce and was like, I want to eat more of this. So that's fun. And they make a really tart jam, kind of like what you would find with, say, a jam made out of slightly underripe red raspberries. And they're excellent to put into muffins, like how you would put blueberries into muffins. You can just sub out the same amount of blueberries for autumn olives and have a really cute end result. That means that you are helping stop an invasive species from spreading. Because the berries are pretty sweet and so plentiful, it is a high value plant for birds, and birds don't know that they're accidentally spreading invasive species. They just know that they're accidentally spreading more food sources. Ooh, candy stuff for the Lowit. Ooh, okay, I'm writing this down. Lehman's outside of Worcester. We're in Worcester from time to time. And they ship. This is fantastic. How dare you guys come in here and teach me things? And by how dare, I mean thank you. This has
There's
been
also
so
a
much fun.
question a little bit further up from Teddy,
Oh,
who
yeah.
asked, do you have a top favorite edible food? Also wanted to point out that they are a big fan of your Instagram.
Oh my God, Teddy, thank you so much. I'm sorry, my cat just decided to be the loudest being in existence right now. Ozzy, do you mind? He does mind. First of all, thank you. I really didn't expect people to start following my Instagram. I made it so I would stop bothering my family members with the weird food that I was eating. So I really appreciate that. And my favorite top edible, this changes so often. It's like asking a parent to choose a favorite child, and every parent does secretly have a favorite child, but you're not supposed to admit it. Right now, I'm really loving field garlic, but I think that's because it is one of those plants that persists through the winter. And so if there's anything fresh that I am eating right now, it is that. But if we're also bringing like fungi into the equation, chicken of the woods. Oh my God, it's such a freaking versatile mushroom. And we have a lot of it in central Ohio, which is always fun and exciting. So I would say that is my answer right now, and it will likely change in the next 10 minutes even. Oh man. Oh, lamb's quarters and pigweed are also fantastic. I got a lot of pigweed coming up accidentally in my plot at the community garden this year. I was the only one who was excited about it. And I love lamb's quarters. I just think it's like better spinach. And I also love the seeds. It's a like distant relative of quinoa, so the seeds will kind of cook in the same way that grain cooks. But also, if you're letting lamb's quarters go to seed, you're committing to having lamb's quarters in your vicinity, probably forever. Oh man, best way I came up with getting to swiftly use thoughts backwards. Tom, you are a genius. That is an excellent leaf gathering hack for all of your like tallish leafy greens. Thank you guys so much for coming and for your engaged questions and for listening to me rant about wild plants. I really appreciate your time, and this was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to, just give us all this awesome information that you have. Also, a quick note, Layman's is not a small place, so if you're going to go, be prepared to spend quite a bit of time in there. It's awesome. And yeah, so somebody asked what your Insta handle is, and you can actually find that on Alexis Nicole's conference portfolio, or if you want to type it into the
Yeah,
chat box real quick.
I can type it in here in the chat box for everybody. So if you are on Instagram, sorry, I was trying to say different words than I was typing, and that just proved to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I am Black Forager on Instagram, and I am Alexis Nikole with a K, thanks mom, on TikTok.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. I
And
just want to hope you're seeing the chat. Everybody's expressing a lot of gratitude. This was a wonderful workshop.
Thank you so much for having me, and I so appreciate each and every one of you. This was so fun. If you guys are willing to have me back, I'm willing to do it again.
awesome. All right. Well, everyone be safe at home. Yeah, if you have something to do. And you can continue asking questions via the conference app and doing the conversation boards and messaging people directly.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody be safe. Have a good day.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.